the liberty to express yourself and let us know about you.
Sure. I have a rather diverse background. I was born in the United States, and now I live in Australia. I've lived in Australia for the past 14 years. I have a degree in mathematics, but was also the editor of my university newspaper. I have a degree in mathematics. I worked for IBM for 18 years, and then from that point forward started 3 different businesses in the United States and here in Australia, 2 of which I've sold, 1 that I'm still running right now, and I think we'll talk about this a little bit. It's a leadership training business right at the moment. We'll probably talk about that here in a bit.
Yeah.
That's sort of the thumbnail sketch as to who I am and how I got to where I'm at the moment.
So would you say that this has affected your accent? I mean, which one do you prefer, like the American accent or the Australian?
You know, my daughter, who moved here to Australia when I was 20, sounds like an Australian. But when I go back to the United States, people say, "Oh, you sound like an Australian a little bit," and I think it's because I say Australian things with an American accent. Not that I've had an Australian accent. And then after I come back here from the U.S., people say, "Oh, you'd like to get your U.S. accent back," but I don't think so. More of your U.S. accent back, because I just think I say more American things.
Right.
While
So,
I'm here in Australia.
Like,
so it's more
difference, between, I mean, the terms that you use. So what would be like a good example for, something that is said differently in the US compared to in Australia?
So perfect combination. If I'm in the US and I'm talking about something that's not a lot of money, doesn't cost a lot of money, you'd say, "Oh, that's just chump change."
Okay.
Which means it's not a lot of money. Here, if you say chump change, they won't know what you're talking about. It's small bickies. The Australian phrase for that is small bickies, meaning nothing but, very tiny biscuits. Meaning it's not going to feed you. It's not going to feed you a lot. There's not a lot there. So, very same thing. Yeah, small bickies. So it's a matter of exactly the phrases that you use and some colloquialisms and local slang and that sort of thing. Just varies. It's been really fun. I tell people I'm multilingual. I have American English and Australian English.
Yeah, we often get to see that in India as well, because so people, I mean, if they're residing in the north but they've been brought up in the south, they would also have some sort of a different accent, and even the cultural values, I think they differ a lot according to the geographical location. The way I was addressing you as sir, but you said that you prefer to be addressed as Bob. So that's
it's interesting. We have the very, very, very different cultural norms. So in Australia, everybody treats everybody very, very evenly, and when you don't do that,
right,
there's actually some disdain. So typically, if you hail a taxi in Australia and you're by yourself, you get in the front seat.
Okay.
Because it doesn't apply. There's a hierarchy between someone that is a servant and then being served, right? So it's that whole maintaining, they call it the tall poppy syndrome. The tall poppy, you might everything all even like a top of a hedgerow, right? It gets chopped off if something grows above the other things. So it was kind of an interesting, that whole dialogue was sort of an interesting clash in cultural expectations, right? That I reflected on after we engaged in the conversation.
True. Even in India, I mean, we would always sit in the, everyone would prefer to get in the back seat and not sit beside the person who's driving the vehicle. That's very different.
Yeah, very different here in Australia in that regard.
So, Bob, you said that you have a degree in mathematics, but the course that you taught on LinkedIn, it's about healthcare management. So, how did that transition happen?
Well, I have 12 courses on LinkedIn. Some in project management, some in leadership, and a very specific thing in healthcare as one option. So, and I know you're talking about expert generalists, so I'll sort of head down that path and describe something. When I worked for IBM so I worked for IBM for 18 years. For the last 11 years, I worked in the outsourcing area, IBM Global Services, and I would manage the delivery of outsourced accounts. So if a company has outsourced the management of their information technology at IBM, I would be in charge of the team that is put in place to deliver against the contract.
Right.
And so in that sense, twice I have worked in a healthcare environment. I've worked in finance. I've worked in electric utility.
Wow.
I've worked in telecommunications, and without having any direct background in those businesses, you learn a lot about those businesses,
Right.
an awful lot about those businesses. So that is really the source of information and context and things that you have to watch out for that ultimately led to the project management healthcare projects course. I probably could do the same thing in terms of, project management in a utility company or project management, but that seemed to be the broadest, most unique
Right.
Environment, I would say, in which to talk about some specifics in terms of managing a project in that environment. So that's ultimately where the source of that course came from.
Right, because the project management would obviously differ according to the field that you're in. So, say, comparing telecommunications with healthcare, there would be a drastic difference, I believe.
The project management isn't that different.
Okay.
The core left-brained logical project management is, you're going to do a schedule, you have to manage resources, you need to know the sequence of tasks, right? It's the particular environment, things and obstacles that you have to overcome. So in a healthcare environment, it's, the protection of patient information and that data and how you store it and how you move it from one place to another, right? That is all absolutely, there's a lot of restrictions on that.
Right.
If I'm working for a major retail store, I can take systems down, IT systems down at 2 a.m. and bring an update and bring them back up as long as they're up for when the store's open at 8 o'clock in the morning. There is no downtime at a hospital. There's none. So that whole environment is just a major, major challenge. And so, I tell people I had black hair before I started working in that environment, and that was the end of my black hair. But it's it's really the particulars that are more environmental, around which you have to apply pretty common project management principles.
So, I was just wondering, did you ever have a dream job or a career? Because you just mentioned so many avenues that you've explored, and I was wondering if one of them was a dream job while you were growing up.
I did have a dream job when I was growing up, and I wasn't able to pursue it. And I'll tell you what that is in a minute.
Okay.
I said, but it's a hard question to answer because I really enjoy where I'm at right now. I've enjoyed the career and the things I've learned and the possibilities of what I have going forward to be able to assist people and but teach, but learn at the same time. So it's hard to say, I wish I had done this. That being said, I always wanted to be a pilot. Love to travel, love the technology of aircraft, and still love aviation. But when I was young, I got hit in the eye with a racquetball, and I lost part of my peripheral vision, so I could never become a pilot. So, but that's all right. It launched me, into a career of doing other things, which I'm very, very satisfied with. I've certainly made my fair share of mistakes and had a path that looked like that versus this from what you learn. But I think that's ultimately the best one could hope for, actually, to be able, as long as you keep going forward, right?
That's true. I mean, whichever career path you opt for, you should just keep moving forward and trying to be the best at that thing, right? So
exactly.
But do you have any regrets? I mean, you said that you're content with what you're doing right now because you get to learn, you get to teach. Do you think that you would have had the same options had you actually become a pilot?
Probably not. And I'd probably have others that I'm not even cognizant of or aware of right now, too.
Right.
So it's a hard thing to theorize. So like I said, I'm really, really content at the moment. But you asked that question if I had any regrets, and there's actually I actually put a chapter in my book called Intelligent Disobedience: The Difference Between Good and Great Leaders, around that. And I talk about regrets and I talk about remorse.
All right.
Remorse lasts forever. Regrets don't last very long. You get over your regrets, but you don't get over remorse. And remorse is when you see something you could have done or should have done and didn't.
Right. I think that's
I have
very
remorse.
profound.
I have remorse. There are times I should have told my manager earlier in my career, particularly, no, that's not going to work. I feel as if that might compromise my integrity. And I didn't do that. And and I tell the story in my book where not only did I not get the right business conclusions, but I lost some friends as a result of, the perceptions of what it is that I was asked to do, that I was trying to do, which really was inappropriate. That's remorse. I'm not getting over that. I can tell you exactly what those friends were like. I can tell you how some of those discussions went. Those memories are burned in my head. There are times, however, that I tried to right a wrong or tried to fix something and failed, and I have regrets about that because I wished I'd succeeded, but I tried. I don't have those same burned memories in my psyche. I know they're there, but that doesn't bother me. I don't have a dialogue in my head telling me, if you'd only could have changed that, if you only could have changed that, right? It's the remorse that stays with me. So do I have regrets? No. Do I have some remorse? Yes. Would I have had moments of remorse had I started in an airplane pilot and had a different pathway? I hope not, but probably would. Sometimes you learn the hard way.
That's right.
And that's what that remorse is.
That's actually, wow, that is so profound. The difference between remorse and regret. I've never thought about that before. So, talking more about your book, Intelligent Disobedience, I really want to know how you came up with this. So, was this term thing that was introduced to you by a mentor, or please go ahead.
No. So I have a course on LinkedIn Learning called Leading with Intelligent Disobedience, and I tell this story on film. And there's also a story in the book as well that introduced me to it. I was in a hotel in California. Okay. And it was at a conference, and you know how conferences sometimes will have a kind of a gala dinner where they're giving awards, and I was one of those. Okay, so it was at the end of the night. I was actually staying at the hotel where this whole event was being held, and I'm standing in front of the elevators, right? Or the lifts, based on where in the world you're in. There's another term between the U.S. and Australia is different, right? The elevator or the lift.
We call it lift.
Yes. Okay. It's a lift down here. It's an elevator if I'm in the U.S.
All right.
So a gentleman comes up next to me, and he's got a seeing eye dog. Mm-hmm. This gentleman is dressed in a beautiful, beautiful suit, right, with a sky blue tie and a little handkerchief in the pocket. Dark suit. His dog has a necktie that matches his master's tie. And it's a beautiful, the image comes in your mind, right? I will never forget the image. And I said to him, so you two look beautiful, right? Mm-hmm. Well, just as we're having this little chit chat of a conversation that started off with this image of the two of them, the elevator came on the floor, the lift came on the floor, but it had failed. The doors had opened. Mm-hmm. The floor of the elevator was maybe, I'm going to come back here, maybe 18 inches or maybe 30 centimeters, 25, 30 centimeters below the floor. Okay. This dog, his dog, turns out his name is Chap, I find out.
Okay.
Sees this. And literally, I'm thinking, okay, a dog is going to put on the brakes and not let his master go forward. No. This dog jumped 90 degrees in front of his master to prevent his master from walking onto that lift. I hardly figured out what it is that was going on because my thought was, well, that looks a little odd. What's going on? Yeah. This dog figured out exactly what was going on and jumped, which astounded me. It was an amazing act of intelligence and awareness. And I talked to the man. I said, "You're probably wondering what's happening." He goes, "Well, I figured the lift failed some way because, of how Chap reacted." And I said, "That was pretty amazing." He said, "The term for that is intelligent disobedience. A seeing-eyed dog spends the first 12 to 18 months of his life being taught how to obey, and the second 12 to 18 months of its life being taught when not to obey and how not to obey to protect himself and me." And then he said something I will never forget. He said, when chap disobeys me, I obey him.
Wow.
And I thought, how many managers and organizations need to hear that statement, right? Not that they're always wrong or employees are always right. That's not what I mean. But employees in an environment have firsthand knowledge of what's going on that the managers often do not. This dog has visible knowledge that its master does not. And its master is smart enough to understand that I'm going to trust when this other information is being presented, or this other guidance is being presented from the dog. Thus, intelligent disobedience, the difference between good and great leaders. And I tried to aspire to do this, and the best leaders I worked with would do this. Understand when you have information that they don't have and are able to assimilate it and make an adjustment. The second aspect to this is if you've got a business process that's really good, I'll pick a number of the air, but 95% of the time that business process is going to yield the outcome the business process is intended to produce. What about the other 5% when it's an unusual situation or a combination of things you hadn't anticipated, right? If you're ultimately going to march down the same path and just follow the process to come out with an outcome that shouldn't happen, you're not going to get good results that way. The best leaders that I have seen know and anticipate when that business process is not going to work. So they're going to modify it, add something, maybe break that process altogether to get the right outcome. The very, very best leaders not only do that, but they work with, promote, and teach their staff, the people that work for them, to do the same thing. When an organization works like that, and that disobedience, by the way, is intelligent, not random, right? And it's all focused toward creating better business outcomes, the performance of that organization, the morale of that organization increases significantly. And I'm telling stories in that book about how some people have done that and how they've assessed the risk associated with engaging in intelligent disobedience and breaking the rules.
That's great. I mean, usually I think, let me take the setting of a school maybe. So when we see children disobeying or teenagers acting out, it's seen as rebellious behavior, but nobody actually tries to listen to the kid or understand why they might be behaving that way. Like, I mean, I think that could be an example of intelligent disobedience, because there might be some times when the child is right.
And it's interesting you say that, because another gentleman named Ira Chaliff, and he and I have met. We both wrote books with the title Intelligent Disobedience within 2 months of each other, not knowing that either one of us was doing it.
Wow.
And so we subsequently met. We've actually presented together. And he's got a book called Intelligent Disobedience, doing good when what you're told to do is wrong.
Right.
So, and it's much more tied towards society and the education of kids, where my book is more business focused and the intention is to create better outcomes. His book is focused on avoiding bad outcomes. And basically what he's saying, in this world, which is becoming sadly a little more dangerous with a lot more people trying to influence children in the wrong way.
Right.
It's a matter of actually teaching kids when to say to an adult, no, I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to get in your car. I'm going to wait for mom, or I'm going to go stand by somebody else I know, or, I mean, to protect themselves. Right. So there's a very important role. Your insight is spot on. There's a very important role for intelligent disobedience that sadly I think we need to teach our children nowadays. And in the same time, in the household, as parents, understand that if you teach them that, there's other things that they're going to present to you, and you actually want to promote that in a positive way while still being parents and providing boundaries and guidance and that sort of thing.
Yeah, if in an Indian household you disobey your parents, you're probably going to be kicked out. So I don't know how that would be perceived as parents.
Yes, I understand. Everybody has to be on the same terms with this whole structure and what you're trying to achieve, obviously, before you go forward. But it's a very interesting book that I also influence people to read. It's a totally different study on the idea of intelligent disobedience, and a very valuable one.
It's great that a concept like intelligent disobedience, it can have so many different perspectives, so many different applications. And so I was just wondering that since the crux of this principle is to know when to disrupt, I think the timing must be really important. So how does one
Oh,
know
absolutely.
when is the right time to create this disruption?
Sure. So um, let me give a little bit of context for it. The first is understand the environment you're in.
Right.
Okay. If I work in Google, for instance, I mean, the folks in Google change some of the parameters of what shows up and how information is presented to people that do searches on their tool, sometimes multiple times in a day, because they've got so much volume they can learn from that and then decide to keep those tweaks or change them or back them out, right? And there's no damage done, and so someone can be really liberal about changing and trying something in that environment. But let me go to a hospital, right? In the scenario we just talked about before, if I'm managing the IT applications that are tracking a patient's health record, I'm going to be extraordinarily careful about making changes or violating the process or breaking the rules by which we put that new software into place. Because if you do it wrong or that system goes down, you have people showing up at hospitals and their medical records aren't available. That's bad, right? So what I've just said is intelligent disobedience in this context with Google would be not intelligent at all to be that, cavalier about changes in the hospital environment. So the first and foremost is you need to understand the environment, the source of why rules and processes are in place, okay, and really understand the outcomes you're trying to create, right? It's very important for me to note, and I do this in the book and I want to do this here, that I don't ever intend intelligent disobedience to be executed for personal gain only. While you may gain personally, because people say, wow, that was a great idea, I'm glad you did that, thank you very much. I didn't do that for my own self-promotion. I am doing that because I saw a better outcome that could be created, or the intended outcome of a process, right, is not going to be achieved. So I'm not going to follow the process. I'm going to do what we have to do to achieve that outcome in this specific situation, right? So you need to understand the environment. You need to understand the rules. I get into some interesting conversations about intelligent disobedience. For instance, Pallavi, when people say, well, I work in a bank. And our process, and there's a lot of regulations in a bank. While that's true, there's an interesting aspect of human nature. So let us say I have to produce this device, or I have to produce, better yet, I have a piece of paper here. I have to produce this report. By regulation, I have to produce this report. I have to produce it monthly, and it has to be accurate. Okay? So businesses create processes to produce this report. Right? Sometimes, but not often, sometimes the process that is used to produce that report, as well as the end report itself, is regulated. Pharmaceuticals in the pursuit of new vaccines, which is really on everybody's mind right now, is a very good example of that. You just can't be, there is a very, very detailed regime of testing you have to go through with certain, and that is regulated as well as the data that you're going to produce that says this drug is safe.
Exactly. Yeah.
But that's not always the case. In a bank, a lot of times that report is regulated. You have to produce this and it has to be accurate, but the process isn't. And people will say, well, I can't change that process because it's regulated. And I go, are you sure? or is just the output regulated? And it's because people say, we're going to follow the process because this report is a regulated, mandatory document. But the process to produce it isn't. I mean, you could use 2 PhDs or 87 kangaroos down here in Australia to produce that report. It doesn't matter as long as the report is accurate. Right. And it has all the data in it, and it's formatted in the way it's supposed to be formatted. So I push back and I challenge a lot of people in regulated businesses. That's just an example of understanding the nature of the rules.
Right.
In this case, the rule is just the output, not the process and the output. In other environments like food, pharmaceuticals, and producing new drugs or vaccines, absolutely the process is regulated as well as the output.
Right. So what I understand from this is that if somebody is looking to innovate, they should maybe disrupt the process to get the outcome that is desired.
Or a better outcome than you've gotten before. And that's really a lot of times what happens is you get greater outcomes. And, sometimes it's the environment that was occurring. I mean, one of the classic times in which someone's made a commitment that was absolutely outrageous at the time was in the United States in 1962 when President Kennedy said, we aspire to put a man on the moon and back before the decade is over. It was before 1970, right?
Yeah.
When he made that speech, the longest space flight that anybody had ever had in America was 4 hours. And even then they had navigational problems with the spacecraft that was going around the Earth. And now they're talking about, a 6-day round trip to the moon with pieces docking with each. I mean, they hadn't done anything like that before, right? And, it was aspiring to innovation, and there was, the whole Cold War situation between America and Russia at the time. The environment was right for a disruption like that to actually be gripped and believed in and you strive for, right? So you're absolutely right. The timing for a disruption is, and what the technology is at, where it's at. I mean, for instance, another example, I'm looking at a high definition screen. I can see you very, very clearly. Hopefully you can see me very, very clearly as well. And as I get older, I'm noticing more and more wrinkles show up, right? If you say, look, I have a spectacular way that I can quadruple the resolution on a screen.
Right.
You do a little bit of research and you realize we are so close right now to the density of the human eye and to what it is, the detail that we can even see. If you quadrupled the capability of density on a screen, humans couldn't tell the difference, right? So what do we need? What do we need at the moment? We don't need that. It could be a great disruption and whole new technology, but
there's no need.
What's the outcome? We don't know what the outcome is, right? So I really think in terms of intelligent disobedience and disrupting as not only the outcome you're trying to achieve, but understanding the risks to the outcomes you're creating today.
Right.
I think it's very important that you understand risk in that context when you engage in intelligent disobedience.
So, I mean, this reminds me of how social entrepreneurship, it always has a cause associated to it. So even if you're innovating something, you should have that thought in your mind that, yes, it should serve the society. I'm doing something for the community. And I think that's great that, intelligent disobedience can be used in that way. Talking about vaccines and hospitals, I wanted to ask you something related to the pandemic. So you also talk about toxicity in the workplace. I was just wondering if you have any tips for people who want to maybe demarcate their work life with their personal life. And, how do you keep work out of your family life in a time like this when everyone is working from home?
I don't know that there's one way to do that. And I don't know in all cases whether that's actually what I would strive to do. And so let
Okay.
me give you a personal story as a means of saying why I say that.
Sure.
I met my wife, Denise, at IBM.
Mm-hmm.
And we both left IBM to start our own business.
Right.
We did that as a means of crafting our work life to better fit our personal life.
Okay.
So we integrated them. We were
Right.
doing the things that were the most fun, but we're also doing things that facilitated our personal life because it's our life.
Right.
Right? There's a really interesting book, another interesting book by Marcus Buckingham called The 9 Lies About Work.
Okay.
And the 9th lie is there's this, that work-life balance is defined by time, and that
Right.
you have time to do other things. They said, and that's not what makes people happy in work, in the work environment, and therefore more productive. What actually makes people happy and productive in their work life, and by the way, it trickles into their personal lives as well, is if, and it's astonishingly low figure actually. It said in all the research that they've done, excuse me, if 20%, only 20%, if 20% or more of your job is something you absolutely positively love doing,
Right.
you'll be more engaged in work, and your outside of work life will be happier because you're fulfilled by the means by which you are using to supply yourself with money and a lifestyle that you want. Now, that doesn't mean that bigger than 20% isn't good, but interestingly enough, they said, where engagement and overall happiness and therefore productivity and authenticity enter into the equation is only 20%, but you want to make sure that's there. So my question to people relative to toxicity in the workplace normally doesn't mean whether you're creating or not creating that 20% directly for people. Are you allowing people in the approach that they have to work, in the assignments that you give them,
Right.
to have that level of fulfillment? Because when they do have that level of fulfillment, they're engaged, they care, they're not going to leave very readily, right? It is a big part of their lives. It's a substantial part of their lives, and they're going to be more productive for you.
Exactly.
I think letting people engage intelligent disobedience with proper boundaries, training, and support helps people create better outcomes, which means they're going to be more fulfilled, which means they're more likely to be more authentic, which means there's going to be less toxicity in that environment, and you're going to have a better world. Now, that's not the only way in which you can or should reduce toxicity in the workplace. There's diversity is a big discussion now, and I'm glad to hear it's expanding beyond diversity to diversity, inclusion, and acceptance. Right? So people genuinely from diverse backgrounds feel as if they're part of the team, feel as if they're part of the company, feel as if they're part of the mission. Doing that and accepting that and having the ability to rumble through new ideas and work those things out, and then ultimately realize we're all good in the end. We still have friends, we still enjoy being part of the team, and we're creating better outcomes together. That reduces toxicity as well. So I think that it's really a multifaceted sort of thing related to intelligent disobedience. But really is if we're creating the environments where people can be productive and authentic, that's probably the core to reducing toxicity. And it also means, by the way, that managers and leaders need to give up some degree, get more control by giving up control, which is, it's almost leading vulnerable with leading and being okay with being vulnerable in doing that.
I agree. So it's sort of like a domino effect. I mean, if the employees like working at the workplace, they will think that, okay, this business is mine, and they would care more about it, and they would work harder and probably enjoy the personal life as well. So I think
and they'll work smarter as well, because they're going to be really much more focused and not worrying about some things that normally they wouldn't have to worry about.
Exactly. So I think, like you pointed out, that authenticity is really important. So if I don't feel like myself at my workplace, I might not be able to give inputs from my background. And then the whole point of diversity is lost. And I think that that brings me to my next question. So I recently attended a webinar in which somebody raised the question that they would like to be authentic at the workplace, but due to their sexual orientation, they're not able to do that because they feel like if they come out to their colleagues, they would have to, I mean, it would be seen as someone who is mixing their personal life with their professional life, and that doesn't create a, it creates sort of an inappropriate image. So would you have something to say about that?
First of all, I know that sort of thing happens,
Mhm.
and it's extraordinarily sad.
Yeah.
Um, when someone has to leave a piece of themselves home
Mhm.
and pretend to be somebody else, they are not putting their energy into producing outcomes for you in the business. They're putting energy into being someone they're not. Now,
Right.
heterosexual people just show up and don't worry about their sexuality. I can behave appropriately as a male with females,
Mhm.
or I can behave inappropriately. And we have that happen on
Yeah.
occasion, right? Someone with a different sexual orientation and, homosexual orientation can behave appropriately with people that they might otherwise be attracted to or
Right.
not. And you hope, you want to do the former versus the latter,
Mhm.
right? So that shouldn't matter. You should be able to go to coffee and, if there's or some to an event that's sponsored by work and bring your same sex partner and be accepted for that.
Right.
Right. And not be a matter of being chatter. So it's like, do you bring your sister? Because, it's just silly.
Mhm.
We are trying to categorize good traits. There's good mainstream humanity things are good and not
Correct.
mainstream things aren't. And gladly and happily, we are more and more realizing that sexual orientation of different varieties, right? I mean, homosexual or heterosexual, both are mainstream. I've seen,
Right.
11% of the population. That's pretty darn mainstream. It's not all of us, but it's pretty darn mainstream, right?
Right.
So, and and you have people that really like sports and people that don't really like sports, and you've got
Right.
introverts and you've got extroverts, and you got,
Mhm.
we should all be welcome at the table for the strengths that we bring to the table, the intelligence we bring to the table, the ideas we bring to the table, the relationship skills we bring to the table.
Mhm.
Whether we are male or female, heterosexual or homosexual, a sports fan, you know, I,
Right.
you know, that only adds the richness to how we can bring experiences to the table and appreciate them. When we get to that point, we're allowing people to be authentic, and the energy that they're spending on hiding some aspect of their life, be
Right.
their orientation towards sports or their
Mhm.
sexual orientation or whatever,
Right.
okay, gets channeled into something much more creative for the business. And you're creating a better environment where at least 20% of their job they absolutely love, because they don't have to worry about some aspect of themselves being revealed if they, enjoy
Yeah.
it.
Yeah. Yeah, right. So I think that businesses should realize, like at workplace, there should be maybe a sensitization workshop or something, so that people realize that it's okay to be themselves, and that how that energy that they would have otherwise used to disclose something, they can use it and invest it in something more constructive. So
And
you said that,
yeah,
yeah. Please go ahead.
yeah, yeah. I apologize if I didn't let you finish. Look, this is easier said than done, in that it puts the onus on the manager, but also the employee to have some really good open conversations as to what the skills are, what it is they prefer, and genuinely what the characteristics are that's going to create that environment where 20% of the time or more they're going to absolutely adore and love their job.
Yes.
Right. So sometimes you have to craft positions around people or move people between positions, you know, to ultimately have that. But when you have that mindset going into it, and you're really consistent with that mindset, and you're really open as a leader about, you know, what it is that you need and what it is people enjoy, and in turn they are open with you and trusting you instead of just saying, yes, boss, I can do that and I'll like it, because they want to have a job and they're fearful that if they say no, they're somehow going to lose their job, right? So this is not a trivial sort of thing to do. This is not wave the magic wand and this happens. This is something that has to be done very, very purposefully. And it will take time, and it takes a lot of trust and openness. And what I'm doing right now in using some of the tools of intelligent disobedience, but also talking to people about this is to the greatest degree I possibly can, and talking to people that are in environments that are not toxic as well as those that are, to try to see what common threads exist, and what management trends and leadership direction they've gotten that ultimately allow this environment to be created and nurtured and grow, and ultimately how do you recruit people? Right. And I saw something really, really interesting, and I'm not ready to talk about this yet because I think it's sort of a fledgling idea, but it was along the lines of, don't interview people, have a conversation.
That's great. That's something that every HR should hear.
I hope so. But what exactly that means, and it's underneath that, I think needs a little, I like the statement. The statement resonates with me. I think there's probably there, but how I ultimately say, well, here's the difference between the two, and here are the nuances, and here you can make sure this continues to stay as a conversation and not an interview.
Right.
I'm still sort of working through that a little bit, but watch this space. I may be talking about something here, but you're right. I hope HR people do get that message.
Well, I'm sure you'll figure it out soon, because I think that idea, since it resonates with you, you would already have so much of context that you would be able to substantiate it and, figure out the nuances, I'm sure.
I hope I refrain from I try to refrain from doing research that way.
Okay.
It's like, I have a notion. If you try hard enough, you can find someone who's going to say, yeah, that's correct, and it looks like this. I'm trying not to do that. I'm saying, well, what do you think of this, and how does this manifest itself, and where have you succeeded, and where have you failed, and what happened? How much of it was an interview, and was it more like this conversation? And one of the other things you have to fight in this exercise is the natural tendency to be attracted to people who are like yourself.
Yeah.
And really the best managerial decisions I think I have ever made have been putting people on a team who are not like me, and to a very degree I was actually uncomfortable with the way they do things.
Yeah.
But that's exactly what I needed, because I don't need people around me that think the same way I do.
Right.
One of us is redundant. That's all you have, right? It's either me or them, probably me, right? So I want to put people around me that don't think like I do. And sometimes that's a little uncomfortable, but that's okay. You got to get okay with that. Got to make yourself okay with that.
I can think of an example. So I'm somebody who likes to be punctual, but I have a few friends who aren't the same. Or if I like to follow a schedule, they might be more spontaneous. And sometimes we do have disagreements, but at the end of the day, yeah, we're having fun. The plan somehow works out. And which is why I like hanging out with them, because they bring something to the table that I don't. And if all of us were the same, then, what's the point of having a friend circle?
Exactly. Couldn't say that better. And it's like you've got to understand where your anchor is, relative to, you know, what you're going to do. You're anchored in punctuality because you want to achieve something.
Right.
And that probably has significant meaning to you. They're anchored in spontaneity and not necessarily following schedule because there's something that they're trying to generate. Right. And it's appreciating that and that intent and what it is they're trying to achieve and saying, look, maybe I can share in that intent created by spontaneity that I don't have a tendency to experience that often because I'm liking the schedule and the punctual sort of way in which you go about things, right? So I think when I talk about, you know, diversity, inclusion, when I mentioned diversity, inclusion, and acceptance, which I think is really, really a good way to package it, you've gone through that with them. But it's very easy for someone to say they drive me nuts because we always agree on a time and they're never there, you know, and I just want to be on time.
I've been there. I've said that.
Yeah. But I mean, what are you missing? What are you missing? Because you've done that. And you know, it's a rhetorical question for anyone to ask themselves when it comes to something like that, right? So.
No, there would have been a lot of experiences that I would have missed out on had I not gone along with their spontaneous plan. So I understand what you're saying. And that just brings me to another question. So like you said, that relationship skills are very important. It's important to respect each other's differences and, you know, accept each other's cultures. So at a workplace, let's say that in the world there is a country called XYZ and it's being attacked by a terrorist group. And there is a citizen of that country who is working alongside with you on a project. Now, you don't want the project to be delayed. I mean, you want to submit it before the deadline. But obviously, you also want to empathize with that colleague of yours because they're going through a rough time. That country is being attacked. So how do you go about empathizing as well as making sure that your work doesn't suffer?
It's easy to label people by a nationality or a sexual orientation or, you know, a number of different things and not see each other as individuals, right? There are, you know, and unfortunately, in today's day and age, with some of the things that are happening, there's a lot of very, very awful pressure and prejudice and things being placed on, for instance, people of the Muslim faith.
Right.
There are some people of the Muslim faith that I know that are some of the most beautiful people I have ever met in my life. What's happening, sadly, is not particularly conveying an appropriate image of what people in you know, with that background, religious background and belief stand for, and it's very unfortunate. Now, and it's interesting, I had a conversation with someone just here in Australia because someone had pointed out that, oh, you know, there was some spread of the virus because of a large Muslim family that had gathered together. And I was like, what a sad way to say that, because I'm willing, you know, that could well have been a large Italian family or a large Catholic family or a large, pick, you know, your other descriptive sort of figure to put in there. But, you know, it's somehow or another extra news now when you can cast disparities at that particular thing. When you take a look through history, right? The Catholic people of the Catholic faith have had some really interesting and not particularly kind, you know, times and periods in the world and some of the activities, and I can probably go on with others as well. We all, as a race and as subset divisions, have our moments of glory and our moments of not so much. And I think it's really important that we don't inappropriately group an individual in with that sort of news making, because it's, you know, you hear it often enough and it starts to echo, right? and that sort of perception echo is what social media does to us right now. I mean, you do a search for something like that, you're going to get bombarded with other things that could validate your really, really skewed point of view, right? Conspiracy theories bounce that way. Things that are not scientific at all bounce that way. 5G is the cause of COVID. Right? I mean, it starts and, everybody gets into a frenzy about it. There's a number of strange things that come about as a result of that, right?
Right.
So I think about, you need to look at the individual and where the individual is coming from, what the individual is doing, what their motivation is, what their joys are, what their strengths are, what they bring to the table. That is ultimately the whole diversity, inclusion, acceptance model. It's not letting those things get in the way. Now, any individual can have some sort of an event that occurs directly to their family or, outside of their direct family that's going to have an impact on them. We all don't have peak days every day.
Mm-hmm.
I can tell you there's days I've gotten a lot of work done and days it's like, I just haven't felt that productive today. I haven't thought that sharply. We're all like that. So it's understanding that we're all like that and accepting, people for who they are and creating what environment we can to help them deliver and be authentic, but also on top of that, deliver the best outcomes they can as possible. There's a book called Fierce Leadership by Susan Scott where she says something really interesting. She doesn't believe in holding people accountable. She believes in holding people capable. And the difference is you can only hold yourself accountable. I can only promise things to myself. I promise probably that I'm going to call you next week, right? I made that promise to you, but that's meaningless unless I truly have the intent to do that and I follow that for me. That's myself holding me accountable. Now you can do things to remind me. You can say there's a reward if you do or a penalty if you don't. And you know what? If I don't care what that reward or penalty is, that's meaningless. What you do in holding someone capable is saying, here are the times, here are the tools. Do you want me to do this for you? Do you have the education? Do you have the information? Do you have clarity of what it is that you're expected to do from a work perspective? How can I do that to hold you capable? It's an interesting perspective. So I get back to, I think if we all work to hold each other capable, I think, communicating bad news is a really, really good aspect to that. It's like some people hesitate, I don't hesitate to get bad news. They might get sad and they might get mad and that sort of thing. Well, what if they find out from somebody else other than you and they realize you didn't tell them and you knew? Right? I mean, you hold each other capable to celebrate the wins, handle not bad news. And I talked earlier about rumbling through things when you don't necessarily are fully in agreement. Hold each other capable of doing that they're not going to take it personally, that you're trying to achieve the best outcome or, put an idea out there that may be new and potentially disruptive that makes people uncomfortable. That doesn't mean it's wrong. So don't just abandon it, work through it, right? Hold each other capable.
That's great. I mean, wow. You've given me a huge list of books to refer to now and a lot of ideas to think about because even though I consider myself to be well-read, these are some ideas that I've never heard of, holding somebody.
We each have a different path and we run across different things. So one of the great things about having conversations like this is to share and we get to pick and choose those things that resonate with us. So yeah, it's great.
This is what I meant by, when I messaged you and I asked you if we could exchange ideas. This is exactly what I meant because people like you, professionals who are doing so well, there is always something or the other to learn. And, you bring a fresh perspective, even though, there is, even though I belong to the more recent generation, but your ideas are more recent than what I have in mind. So I don't think that the age difference or anything of that sort matters when it comes to learning. You can learn from anyone.
You're absolutely right. You're absolutely right. And let me just recognize you've honored me with what it is that you've just said, and I'm very grateful. Thank you.
No, thank you. I would like to thank you for being a part of this. So I think I'm going to wrap this up now. So, do you have any last thoughts, any words that you would want to share?
Um, I think it's okay to be you.
Yeah.
I think more people need to understand it's okay to be you. And if you accept yourself for what you are and you're honest with yourself about what you are, it's easier to present that and talk through that and ultimately create a better environment. There's a funny story associated with that I'll tell you as a means of closing.
Yeah.
My wife and I have been together for 23 years, and I'm crazy about that woman. We have a wonderful, wonderful relationship, and we've been business partners as well as life partners for most of those 23 years. So a lot of people can't do that. And I tell a story about this. At one point in time, we were about a couple of years into the relationship, and I am a horror show when it comes to using power tools or fixing things. I just don't have the patience for it. I have high expectations that I never meet, right? So I get grumbly for a couple of days before I know that I'm going to be doing some sort of job, and then I do the job, and I normally do break things along the way, and it takes too long. It doesn't come out quite like I want. So I'm grumbly for a day after. But both my wife and I, even though we're very comfortable, we've always been really mindful of spending money. We're very mindful of what we spend money on, right? And so I'm doing this a lot because you know what, I can do this. I can get it done, right? And then we don't have to spend the money. Denise says, Bob, we have to talk. Oh, okay, sounds serious. She goes, there's just something I want to tell you. She says, if we pay people to do, you're grumbly for 2 days, you don't like the thing, you're grumbly for 2 days after, I'll love you a lot more if we pay somebody else to do these things, right? And it was, so there's two things associated with that. One, it's Bob, she's saying, you do understand this in yourself, don't you? And that was this yes. And she's saying, it's okay. You're okay. You are enough. You don't need to be that person for me or for us, for me to love you and stay in this relationship. In fact, I'll love you more if you give into it. Let's hire someone else to do it. I was like, fantastic, right? It's a great thing. So, I think, and she was holding me accountable,
right,
to know that I wasn't going to be insulted by that it was really presented in a very, very truthful, a very, very honest way, a very, very loving way. And our relationship's a lot better because I have a few days in which I'm being grumbly, right? And as much as that's a funny little, story, and there's probably harder things to share with each other and admit to ourselves than that, it's really as simple as admitting something to yourself, accepting that in yourself, that we all have strengths and weaknesses, and being honest with each other and sharing those things so you can work out what the best alternative is. So a bit of self-awareness and a bit of being okay to be vulnerable and engage each other when you truly care about something and outcomes. Engage in a conversation to help you both get there.
Thank you so much, for sharing that beautiful story. And I would really like to congratulate you both for, spending 23 years, not just as partners in your personal lives, but also in professional lives. That's great.
Thank you. Excuse me. Thank you. I'm very fortunate, and this is great fun. So thank you for inviting me to have this conversation with you.
Yeah. Thank you for coming.
Help you increase the number of views on a post. We can maybe double it. Mine actually tripled. So I went from having anywhere around maybe 2,000 views to 6,000 views.